We have more callers here. We have Jay in Florida. Oh, it's just Florida slash Lower Alabama. How are you, Jay, and how can we help? Welcome to the line.
I am all right. I am calling because I've heard you in particular, Matt, say that you don't choose what you believe because you don't get to choose what convinces you. I've tried to do my homework and, see where you said that and the context and your explanations for that. I'm not convinced. I'm an agnostic theist, if I'm being the most intellectually honest. And I think to at least to an extent, you get to choose what convinces you, especially in certain circumstances. And this is part of my effort to try to be more internally consistent and better understand myself.
Cool.
That's
Then
why
why
I
don't
want
you
to call
just
and
why
get
don't
some clarification.
yeah, why don't you just choose to believe me when I say you can't choose your belief? And then we're all done.
I'm not convinced of that.
Well,
Uh,
I apologize, but if you're not convinced that you must be convinced, which is what you just said, then you can just choose to believe me when I say that you don't get to choose your beliefs.
and I'm certain that somebody could just choose to believe you.
Well,
Um,
see,
but
I'm
I
not
personally
certain about
cannot choose
anything.
to believe you.
I'm not certain about anything, but I do know that when I said that you should just choose to believe me, your response was to say that you weren't convinced, which is to make my argument, which is that every position you have is something you must become convinced about. It's not just a simple choice.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood your argument then at the time. Again, I tried to do my homework. I tried to look up where you said these things, and it seemed more like you don't get to choose what convinces you when it comes to religious belief. You just kind of are that way, is the way it came across to me. And I could
No,
be
no,
completely misunderstanding you.
it's not about you are that way. It's so like here's a proposition. X is true. You're either convinced, in which case you say, I would believe that proposition, or you are not convinced, in which case you would say you don't believe that proposition. But, the state of being convinced is the result of becoming convinced. And you can become convinced for good reasons or bad reasons. But I don't see how you can become convinced merely by choosing to be convinced.
Okay. I guess you just kind of, I feel that you can choose the criteria that is convincing based on knowledge, experience,
That's not what I
your
just said.
feelings, that kind of thing.
So first of all, I didn't say anything about whether or not you could choose the criteria that you find convincing. I talked about whether or not you can simply choose to be convinced of the proposition. However, while I would agree that we all have an impact on what criteria we are likely to accept, those things are the result of becoming convinced as well. In the sense of if you say, I'm not going to trust the government, it's not that you decided that you're not going to trust the government. Something has convinced you that the government is untrustworthy, and therefore you reject that source. At no point does anyone sit around going, you know what? Here's 100 sources. I'm going to accept that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and reject that one, that one, that one for no reason other than I've just decided to do so. That's not the way any of this works.
Okay.
So Jay,
That actually makes it a lot easier.
in your
Sorry.
research, did you come across the phrase doxastic voluntarism or
I have never heard
involuntarism?
that in my life.
That's literally
I've
what
never
we're
heard that
talking
in my
about.
life.
That's
Sorry.
awesome.
So if you haven't heard those phrases, I'm skeptical of how deeply you research this. So I would encourage you to look up those phrases and look at the people who for centuries have studied those two things. Now, the second one, doxastic involuntarism, is the position you seem to be espousing. And that is that one can choose to put themselves in a position where it's more likely they will choose to become. So say, for example, I would I moved to India. I have put myself in a position where I am then more likely to become a Hindu than I am if I stay living in Nova Scotia, for example, because there's a lot more
Mm.
people who espouse that and I'm going to be exposed to it more. Or like, so for example, if I start watching exclusively Fox News, I'm more likely to end up becoming a different thing. But that does not mean that ultimately I will be convinced by those things. It does mean that I've chosen to expose myself to different things. There's always, no matter how you feel about something, there's always a level of evidence that will overcome it. So it doesn't matter how much I believe that my partner is faithful to me. If I was to walk in on my partner being unfaithful, that would be enough evidence, no matter how convinced I was, or no matter how convinced I am that my car is in the driveway. If I walk out there and it's not there, I'm going to become convinced. So, there's always those things that no matter how, what I put myself in, there is always something that will overcome that. So that's my little rant about doxastic voluntarism. And I go look that up because it's kind of fun reading.
Yeah, in all fairness, the homework that I did was I remember hearing Matt say it once in one of these streams and looked up other YouTube clips of him saying it. And
Yeah, that's
y
not homework.
in the clips that I saw where
See,
I
this
didn't
this is
know there
kind of
was a
what Paul was
fancy
saying.
word for it.
Yeah, if this is kind of what Paul's talking about here, because if you, as an act, as a voluntary act, decide that you're only going to watch Fox News, it is undeniable that you are going to, well, almost undeniable that you are going to wind up believing some absolute shit, which we know from court transcripts from Rupert Murdoch and others in this Dominion lawsuit case, where Fox News is admitting that despite the fact that the talking head, air quotes, journalists did not believe the claims, they kept putting the claimants on. They had Sidney Powell on, who said her only source was someone who time traveled in a semi-conscious state. That was her only source for that. Now, if you're the type of person, I'm not saying you are, Jay, but if you're the type of person who has made a decision that you're going to expose yourself to that source, whether or not you think it's reliable or not, if you're not also engaging with the sources that offer counters to that, then you are creating a strong likelihood that you are going to be deceived, because that network, Fox, lies, and they lie for money. They've said it under oath. Don't take any of, and I know you're not the Fox person, but this needs to be clipped out for everybody who's related to me. Fox News willingly lies for money. Rupert Murdoch himself said this isn't about red or blue, it's about green. The Tucker Carlson lawsuits and stuff like that, their legal defense is that he's a talking head who no one should seriously think is presenting factual information. This is the way it goes. And yet there are countless people who sit there, and that's, I go into a hotel, every hotel I go to, it's Fox News on the TV. I don't know what it is. Every time I'm at a convention, there's a hotel, Fox News on the TV. Not that I'm saying MSNBC or CNN or anybody else is necessarily better in the sense that their information is necessarily going to be true. It takes more than that. And so, yes, you as an active agent, I don't know how free your will is, but can exercise, hey, I'm going to listen to this source, I'm not going to listen to this source. But the way in which you come about those tends to be more of a, I find this source compelling, even if you don't know how or why. You became convinced of something for reasons that you may not even consciously process, and that leads you to that bias. But at no point in that process has anyone been able to identify to me, oh, I merely chose to believe Proposition X.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. You explained it in a way that I can understand. And you gave, Paulogia offered me the term to actually look up and figure out a little bit more of my own thinking on this. And I appreciate your time. I figured if I had the question, somebody else out there certainly did. So
Yeah,
thank you for taking the time to answer it.
absolutely. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
See, you did something which I love, which is to talk about doxastic volunteerism. And I had to unlearn this. I love when other people do it, but I had to unlearn this. And part of it was something you mentioned earlier about the term ignorance and its use colloquially. My ex-wife, basically probably 10 years ago or so, uh, metaphorically hit me over the head with a frying pan when I got home from an episode of The Atheist Experience, saying, please stop saying argument from ignorance. Please stop saying argument from
Mm.
ignorance, because the people who don't know anything about fallacies think you're just calling them stupid. And instead of naming the fallacies, which is great, and I wish people could understand them so that we could use that shortcut language, it was best to describe the fallacies. And so between the two of us, we got both done. And you got Shannon and everybody else in chat who's like, oh yeah, doxastic volunteerism. Yay, somebody finally said it. And I think you need both.
Well, I wouldn't have brought it up if Jay hadn't had said, I'd done my homework.
Yeah, fair.
Because that was only there. It was like, well, did you at least get as far as labeling what you're talking about? So anyway.
She took it in stride though. And I appreciate that.